Hello everyone, my name is Bonni Rambatan and I'm the creator of Blabber. I've started drawing for as long as I can remember, actually. So when I was a kid, I just used to draw and draw and draw. And one thing that really irked me, that I really wanted to do more, was that I wanted my drawings to tell a story, right? So what I would do is just, I would take my drawings, I would show them to people, and I would tell the story in person of what this drawing is all about, right? But I felt kind of bothered by it, because like I wanted my drawings to tell a story without me having to actually narrate it to people. So I discovered comics when I was a kid, right? Because we grew up with a lot of Japanese manga and all those things during my childhood. So I started really loving comics, and I started wanting to do more and more comics. So I think the earliest comics that I actually really did quite seriously was when I was in elementary school. So I still remember I had the characters I built, like I folded some papers to become characters, and I would draw them, make some comics out of them, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that was my first journey of becoming a comic artist. Growing up, I was exposed to various kinds of comics, both Japanese comics and European comics. My favorites were, I have quite a few. For the Japanese ones, you have the standard ones that probably most Indonesian kids my generation grew up with. There is Doraemon, there's Dragon Ball, and there was Detective Conan a little bit later. I really like these titles. And for the European comics, of course, we have Tintin and the Smurfs. I really enjoyed those titles. One of my favorite titles in European comics was Steven Stirk. I really loved it because it has elements of mystery. I really like investigative stories, with characters solving crime, especially the ones that are more kid-friendly. So I was strongly influenced by all of these titles, both in terms of style and I guess also in terms of narrative. So my story, Blabber, is about a person reminiscing about his past through the aid of sounds. He went to this house that's about to be torn down, and he found a bunch of old cassette tapes. He started listening to them, and it really took him back to the days of his childhood, and he started remembering what happened in his childhood and how he grew up in that house, right? And then imagining the future, imagining like what would happen soon. Right. So in this way, I'm kind of using sound as a memory device, so to speak. Sounds from the past, recordings of the past, and then as a device of imagination in that kind of manner. So yeah, for more details, just go and read the story, I guess. I submitted Blabber for sound because mostly because I was very interested in the premise of exploring sounds within comics, right? And this story specifically, I wanted to explore memories. And I thought there was like a lot of interesting things I could do, tying up certain sounds with certain memories and just telling a story through the significance of sound in forming our memories and forming our imaginations and what sounds mean in there. So yeah, so that was my thought process. When I submitted it, I thought that I really want to do some interesting things exploring the concept of both sound and the concept of memory. So the story for Blabber itself was actually inspired by the death of my grandmother, and especially the memories I had with her. We had with her, actually, like my family and myself had with her, and the house that she lived in. Because she passed away in 2017, and right away, the government just wanted the land back. That element was just really very strong, and I realized that houses don't last forever, and these kinds of memories too. They really, sometimes when a person is gone, you just really think there are a lot of things that go away with them, and I think one of the things that went away from me was that place, that house itself, that I've been spending a lot of time in since I was a child. I don't actually live there, but I visit the place a lot, right? But then, yeah, it has to be returned, it has to be destroyed. And I was thinking, I have a lot of fond memories there, growing up there. And it was also a place of soundscapes, because my grandmother used to direct the choir group and all these sorts of things. And of course, there's all the sounds of children playing outside and all these things, all these memories jumbled up together, right? So that was the primary inspirations of why I wanted to tell this story. Even, obviously it's not like an exact replica. The house was sort of inspired there, but in the comics, a lot more idyllic. In the real life, it's more like a campus complex. So that's why the government wanted the land back in order for the house to be destroyed and stuff like that. I thought there was something bittersweet about that story, about that memory, which I really wanted to convey across in my story. Personally, the sounds of blabber did mean something to me, although it might be slightly different from the protagonist in the story, since I don't really have the recordings like in the cassettes. But what I do have, and what I still remember until now, because I was an only child up to when I was about 12 years old, when I was nearing the end of my elementary school years. But entering high school, there suddenly came a little brother that I ended up having, right? And what I noticed, because I was expecting to have to have a little brother, and I would play with him and all these things. But then what I did not expect was how much the soundscape would change, right? And it's super obvious when you think about it. Obviously, when you come to a house full of little kids, it gets like really loud with all these screamings, with all these nonsensical roars and sounds of explosion coming from the shouts of little children. And that's what I experienced in growing up in high school. Then suddenly there was this little kid. He's probably gonna kill me if he sees this video. To embarrass you, but yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that growing up really hit me. It really meant a lot to me, getting introduced back just as I was leaving my childhood. I was reintroduced to the world of childhood through these very particular sounds that I started hearing throughout my high school years, and then a little bit throughout my university years. So yeah, I was growing up in the midst of childish sounds, childish blabbers. So I was thinking, like, I wanted to incorporate that in the concept of memory that I'm exploring with this comic, right? If we had recorded that, like, what kinds of things, what kind of memories would I have? Like, what kind of images would they conjure up in my head, and what kind of because I already have strong memories of them right now. So I think that would make for an interesting exploration. That's why I incorporated them into the comic. That's what they personally meant to me. For comic artists, I mean, they're of course they're the basic things, right? There's the texture of the sound, the volume of the sound, like how big do you want the letters to be and how bold they are, and if they echo, you added more lines to them. I think that's pretty standard. But the thing that I kind of like explored a little bit further here in the comic book was that transitioning from the actual space to the imaginary space, right? Children playing, and when sound effects actually come from the mouth, but then they turn into actual sound effects, like thick bold letters, kapow or groar, stuff like that, in the imaginary space. So I tried to transition, moving between speech bubbles, and then the speech bubbles directly transform into letters. I kind of like wanted to explore more in that kind of way, because the reason being, simply because how do you differentiate between the imaginary space and the actual space, and how do sounds change in that manner, right? Because when we run around as kids, because the sounds obviously come from our mouths and all of these other things, right? But generally they come from our mouths. But in our imagination, they become this huge, majestic sounds of monsters or spaceships or explosions. So I wanted to convey that in the comic itself. So that kind of technique, I never really personally used it before in any of my works. I'm sure other people have, but I thought, yeah, that was quite an interesting aspect for me to explore. I actually really did enjoy the process of creating Blabber. As for the things that I enjoyed the most, obviously the first thing that I enjoyed was to explore all of these different concepts, to finally get to tell my story, right, as I talked about previously. But another thing, and this is probably just a similar case with all of my works, and I think this is a key reason why I can't really go on a weekly or even monthly production schedule, is because I actually really love doing details. I love doing perspectives. I love doing details. I love doing creating these tiny little plants between the staircase that nobody will ever see. That kind of thing. I actually really love doing them, and just doing these kinds of things, like how does the shadow of the car fall onto the grass, and can we see little tiny bits of grass in those shadows, even though it might not matter for the comic in the long run. It doesn't really represent anything. It doesn't really it's not probably that important on a larger scale, but I find myself getting obsessive over those details. So that was why the longest part for me was the inking, was the rendering of all these details and these textures. I just happen to enjoy them a lot. Happen to enjoy doing details, and I happen to take really, really long doing them. So yeah. So I'm the type of person who believes that once the story is out there, readers should be free to take any message, take any message they want. Right? Readers should be free to interpret it in any way they might find meaningful. They might draw a different meaning from the story that from what I intended to, and that would be great. I would be happy. I would be completely happy if they can take those kinds of meanings for themselves. Right? For me personally, I have this thing that I wanted to tell, and I felt that I've personally successfully conveyed it in this short little story for myself. And now that it's out there, feel free to make of it what you will. If you want to take a certain kind of message, feel free. If you want to take another kind of message, then sure, yeah, I'll be happy with that. This is quite an interesting question, because for anyone who's ever read my longer pieces, whether they're comics or in other formats, I mean, they always tend to bring up issues of of diversity, of human rights, of labor rights, and of oppression, marginalization, all these kinds of issues. Are really I am really influenced by my own philosophical work in terms of how I see the world and my political views, and of course these in turn inform my works, right? So I tend to create very strongly from those viewpoints, whether I like it or not. It's not a conscious decision that the viewers need to get these messages in mind. I don't want to hammer anything in their heads, but they inform my works, especially my longer pieces of works, and my more I guess my artistic installations and stuff. They're all informed by that. But for my shorter pieces, for my short stories or short comics such as this one, probably I'm more informed in terms of format, in terms of thinking things that might not occur to if I had not engaged in philosophy. For example, in Blabber, of course, the word itself means something that doesn't have an inherent meaning to it. And I think when something does not have an inherent meaning to it, it's precisely when you can infuse a lot of emotions there, right? So sounds of spaceships, sounds of explosions, sounds of monsters, those things from your childhood, those things do not have any specific meaning, but they carry a lot of weight, a lot of emotions, a lot of fantasy there. So that's what makes it interesting, right? So it's the same goes with toys, for example. Toys don't serve a clear utilitarian purpose, but especially because they're meaningless, except they're just they look good and they're just playful in that way. I think it's precisely in that way that they become something fun, something enjoyable, something emotional, something sentimental. So I guess that's how my works in my other fields sort of influence and inform my work in comics. The most important thing for storytellers of any medium is to be honest. To create a good story, you just have to be honest. You just need to take from the truth of your emotions and just convey it there, right? So some people say, write what you know and so on. I don't subscribe to that, but I think the better way to put it is that write what you emotionally know. Write what you emotionally know to be true. Write your own emotional truths, right? So you might not know anything about a certain race in a fantasy story, for example. You might not know anything about this alien civilization that you're writing on another planet. But if you're taking your own emotional truths to that, for example, if you're a writer of color, for example, who's experiencing certain kinds of racism and oppression, and your aliens experience that, like a similar thing, that would make for a great story, an exciting story. Of course, there's the whole matter of how you execute it and all the kinds of sensitivities that you have to get into. But I think the first thing that you have to know when you want to convey something is just to be honest. Because I see a lot of people who want to make a story to be cool, perhaps, or they really find it. I mean, this is not a bad thing if you're starting out. Like if you're a kid, or if you're just in high school, if you're just really starting out to tell your own stories, and you think, oh, this trope is interesting, or this kind of event is interesting, let's just put it there in my story. I mean, you can start out by doing that. You can, of course, exercise in that way. But once you really get down to it, I think it's important to find your truth, to find your honesty, to find the core of your emotions that you really are you're struggling with, perhaps, or you really want to convey, and you'll have a good story, and you'll engage your readers much better that way than forcing a story, for example, based on what the trendy tropes are. Right? Yeah. For me, it's not important in as much as it is inevitable. If you are a writer or a creator growing up and raised and immersed in Southeast Asian culture, that kind of upbringing, those kinds of roots will ultimately inform and influence your work. Whether you are writing about Southeast Asia, whether you're writing about other people, other countries, whether you're writing about a fantasy land, a fantasy series, your roots will inform what you write, right? And this is not to say that Southeast Asian people will ultimately have to create Southeast Asian works, right? I mean, I do not want to limit, and I do not want to undermine various creators coming from Southeast Asia that are writing from about other parts of the world, right? And writing fantasy and writing all kinds of stuff, right? So I think personally, people should be free to create whatever they want, any kind of story that they feel like they have to tell in the best way that they feel like they can tell it, whether that's whether that's set in their home country, whether that's set in their home region or in other places. But creators should also realize that the way that they are brought, the culture in which they are brought up, their roots, will ultimately inform the way that they write, right? Will ultimately inform their perspective on the world. And the sooner they realize this, the sooner that they can infuse these things together and create a very unique perspective in their work, right? And I think it's that emotional honesty. It comes back to that over and over again, I know, but I think it really does. I think rather than focusing on, oh, because you're a creator from Southeast Asia, then you have to create works based off of Southeast Asia, and you have to create, like, if you're not drawing ornaments like batik or whatever, then you're not really a Southeast Asian creator. Like, I don't like that, because not only that it is limiting, but also it shifts the focus away from emotional honesty to something that's a lot more surface level. So I think you shouldn't worry too much about the surface. You should just realize your own roots and your own upbringing, your own identity, and just let it inform you. Just explore that in any kind of story you want to create. Just explore who you are and how you've been raised and your surroundings. And I think you'll manage to create a compelling story that's unique just only to you, that you can tell. Okay, first of all, obviously we get like a whole lot of talented creators from Southeast Asia. I mean, it's been amazing. The number of talents that that we continue to see every day on Twitter and Instagram, on on weekly webtoons, for example. That's just it's just staggering. So what I personally would like to see in the future is that parallel to that, we are also getting the streaming wars, so to speak, right? People are more and more hungry for things to watch, and platforms such as like Netflix or Disney and all these new platforms are coming up. They're looking for new shows, the new things to be adapted into shows. I'm personally hoping that they would look more and more into comics made by Southeast Asian artists to be adapted into into series, not only in Southeast Asia but also globally. I know that it's been happening, and I'm really excited to see that. Not sure I can talk about the actual titles of that just yet, but yeah, I hope to see a lot more of that in the future. Actually, I think the world is becoming a lot more and more of a level playing field, so to speak. I think more and more walls are being taken down, more and more gatekeepers, and people are realizing the value of diversity. I think that's the most precious thing, that creators are more able to access more parts of the world, and new talents are cropping up. So yeah, I think I see a lot of good things in the future of Southeast Asian comics. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and don't forget to read sound when it comes out too.